A starving nun sheltered a wounded rider overnight. He was the governor's son. The bullet was still in me when I rode up to that place. I didn't know what it was at first, a mission, a ruin, something between the two. Adobe walls the color of old bone, a wooden cross on the roof with one arm broken off and hanging by a single rusted nail, swinging a little in the wind that came down off the flats. I'd been riding for about 6 hours, and the wound had gone from a sharp, particular thing to something bigger and stupid, a whole side of me that felt wrong, and I was doing what a man does when he's in bad trouble on a bad horse in a country he doesn't know well. I was looking for anything that wasn't open sky. The horse was Cruzado, and Cruzado had been shot too, a graze along the neck that had dried to a dark crust and didn't seem to bother him except that he was done. He'd been done since noon. He was a good horse and he'd carried me anyway, and when I pulled him up in front of that broken cross and slid down, I put my hand on his neck where he was warm and damp and I said, "That's enough," and I meant it. I didn't call out. I stood there in the dust with one hand pressed to my side and waited to see if anyone would come, and after a moment the door opened and a woman stepped out. She was small. She was wearing the dark habit, full, long, the white at her face, and she was not young, maybe 50, maybe older, with a face that had been outdoors in this country for years and knew it. She looked at me the way people look at a thing they have already decided about, not alarmed, not welcoming, just deciding. She said in English with a Spanish shape underneath it, "You are shot." I said, "Yes, sister." She said, "Come inside," and that was it. That was the whole conversation. She turned and went back through the door and I followed her because there was nothing else to do. The name on the cross outside, what remained of it, said San Isidro. The inside was 4 rooms, the church part which was barely a church. A wooden table serving as an altar, 2 candles, a painted figure of the Virgin that someone had loved for a long time, the paint worn off her hands, and then a kitchen, a sleeping room, a storeroom that appeared to hold almost nothing. I learned the nothing part later. That first hour I didn't notice much of anything except the chair she put me in, and the lamp she lit, and the way she got my coat off me with a kind of no-nonsense efficiency. Not rough, not gentle, just purposeful, the way a woman gets a job done. There were 2 other sisters. One was very old, Sister Tomasa, who walked with a stick and whose eyes had gone milky at the edges, and one was young, no more than 20, Sister Perpetua, who looked at me over the old woman's shoulder with an expression I couldn't read. Fear or interest or both. The woman who had let me in was called Sister Claudia. She was the one who ran the place. That was obvious in the first 5 minutes. She was the one who sent Sister Perpetua for water and told Sister Tomasa to sit down and stay out of the way. And she was the one who came and stood over me with a lamp in one hand and looked at the wound with her eyes steady and her face showing nothing. "When did this happen?" she said. Not a question exactly, more like she was asking the wound. "Yesterday morning," I said, "just after first light." "You rode all of yesterday and today?" "I did." She made a sound that wasn't quite disapproval. She set the lamp on the table beside me and said, "The bullet is still there." "I know." She looked at me then, at my face. First time she really did. She was reading something, I don't know what, and whatever she found seemed to settle something for her. "I have done this before," she said, "not often." "I believe you," I said. "It will hurt." "I know that too." She nodded, and that was the agreement between us, and she went and got what she needed. I want to be careful here, talking about that night, because it's easy to make it into something it wasn't. It wasn't a story about me being brave. I wasn't brave. I held the chair arm and I did not yell, that's the most I can say for myself, and there were a few minutes in the middle of it where I don't know exactly what I did or didn't do. What I remember is her hands. She was very quiet. She worked in close to the lamp and she didn't talk while she worked, didn't make reassuring sounds, didn't tell me it was almost over. She just worked. And there was something in that, in being treated like a man who could handle it without being narrated through it. That was its own kind of steadying. When it was done, she cleaned the wound with something that burned and wrapped it with strips of cloth that were clean but old, worn to a softness from washing. She tied the end of the bandage and stepped back and looked at her work and said, "You should sleep." "Yes," I said. "Can you walk?" "I can walk." She showed me to a cot in the corner of the storeroom. The storeroom had some dried corn in a sack, and 2 or 3 other sacks that I later learned held almost nothing useful, and an old saddle on a sawhorse and a broken plow blade and not much else. The cot was narrow and the blanket was thin, and I lay down on it and was gone before she left the room. I slept 14 hours. I know this because when I woke, the quality of the light through the single small window told me late morning, and I'd arrived in the late afternoon the day before. I lay still for a few minutes and took stock. The wound throbbed, but the throbbing was a clean kind of pain, nothing hot or spreading, which meant no infection yet, which was the main thing to worry about. I was very hungry. I was also, I realized, in a position I'd never been in before, which was, I didn't know who I was here. That needs explaining. My name is Calvin Marsh. I was 26 years old that year. My father was Martin Marsh, who was the governor of the territory. I had not spoken to my father in 3 years. I had left the governor's house in the capital with my gear on my back, and my father's voice going hard and quiet behind me. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to, and I had spent those 3 years doing what I knew how to do, which was ride and work cattle and take on whatever came. I had gone north and then west. I had worked a season in Colorado and a season in New Mexico, and then drifted east again across the Texas Panhandle, and eventually found myself south of the Canadian River, working for a man named Cutler who ran cattle, and had a few other enterprises that bore less scrutiny. The bullet in my side had come from one of Cutler's other enterprises. I had made a judgment about it, and Cutler had disagreed with my judgment, and the disagreement had been brief and final, and I had ridden out with what I had, and that was that. I had told nobody my name in 3 years, not my real name, not who my father was, because men who knew those things treated me in one of 2 ways, either with a deference I hadn't earned or with a kind of calculation, wondering what use I might be. I had gotten tired of both. I had no interest in my father's name or his position or what either one could do for me. I had my own 2 hands and what I knew, and I had wanted to find out if that was enough. By the time I woke up on that cot in the storeroom of San Isidro, I was beginning to think the answer might be no. Sister Claudia came to the door when she heard me moving. She looked in, assessed me, came in and put her hand against my forehead for a moment. "No fever," she said. "No. Hungry. Badly." She made the sound again, the not quite disapproval. "Come eat," she said. "There is not much, but there is something." There wasn't much. Cornmeal porridge cooked thin, half a heel of bread, water. She sat across the wooden table from me while I ate, and she ate nothing herself, and I noticed this and thought I should say something, and then she looked up and read my expression and said, "I ate earlier," in a way that I knew was a lie, and also that she knew I knew, and neither of us said anything more about it. "How long has the mission been here?" I said. 40 years. My order established it. There were 7 of us once. She looked at her hands on the table. Now 3. What happened to the others? 1 died. 1 was called back east for health reasons. 2 were reassigned when the diocese decided the mission was no longer viable. She said the word viable with a particular precision, like she was handling a piece of broken glass. "And you stayed?" "We stay," she said. "The people who come to us have no other place." "Who comes?" "Anyone who needs to come, as you did." I thought about that. The mission was 4 days' hard ride from the nearest town of any size. It sat on the edge of nothing, those flat burnt plains that went on and on toward the Llano, and I had found it by accident. following a dry creek bed because the land dropped that direction and I was hoping for water. It was not on any map I had ever seen. "You're running out of food," I said. She looked at me steadily. "We manage." "When did you last have a supply wagon?" A silence, then November. It was March. I did not say anything else about the food. There was nothing to say that she didn't already know. I ate what was in front of me, and I thanked her, and I asked if there was anything I could do to be useful. And she looked me over with the same measuring look she'd given me the night before and said, "Can you walk to the well?" "I can." "Then walk to the well." The well was 40 yards from the back of the mission building, and she was right that it was a meaningful question, because 40 yards was about what I had in me that first morning. By the time I got there and back, I was sweating and my side was sending messages I didn't want to receive, but I had done it, and I lowered myself onto a bench against the wall and sat in the early sun and watched the territory spread out in every direction, that enormous quiet country, and felt something unknot slightly in my chest. Sister Perpetua came and sat beside me after a while. She was scrubbing a piece of leather harness, and she sat a few feet away and worked without looking at me, and then looked at me. "You are not a hired rider," she said. I was. But not only. She was young and direct and apparently unworried about what a man who'd been shot might think of her saying so. "Your hands are right for it, but your speech isn't." "I was educated some," I said. She seemed to accept that as sufficient. "Where are you trying to get to?" "North," I said, "eventually." "North is a long way from here." "I know." She went back to the harness. Then she said, quietly, as if she was saying it to the leather, "Sister Claudia sat up the whole night with you. She does that when she thinks someone might need it. You should know she did that." I didn't say anything. I looked out at the plains and the sky and tried to make myself understand what she'd said, which was a simple thing, but it sat in me in an unexpected place. The days that followed were slow and had a quality I hadn't known before, a particular stillness. I was not well enough to ride, not for the first week, and even afterward I waited because there was something about leaving that I kept not doing. I told myself it was practical. The horse needed rest. My side needed rest. These things were true. They weren't the whole truth. I started working in the mornings when I could, quietly, without making a declaration of it. The corral fence needed 3 new rails, and I found the timber for it in the dry wash and spent 2 mornings cutting and fitting. The roof of the small outbuilding where they kept the one remaining goat had gone bad on one corner, and I patched it. There was a section of the acequia, the irrigation ditch, that had silted over, and I dug it out. Small work. The kind of work that needed doing on any property that was just barely staying alive. Sister Claudia watched me do these things without comment, which I came to understand was her form of approval. She was not a woman who said things she didn't mean, which meant she also didn't say things she did mean unless she had to. She would come and look at the fence rail I'd fitted and nod once and walk away. After a few days, that nod was something I noticed I was looking for. She talked while she worked, not about herself mostly. She talked about the country, the way the weather came off the mountains to the west, the cycles of drought, what the local Comanche bands had been reduced to, which she described with a plainness and a sorrow that held no sentimentality. She talked about what the mission had been and what it was now. She talked about the people who had come through. "A man last fall," she said one afternoon. We were sitting on opposite sides of the church table, and she was mending and I was cleaning the single rifle they had, which turned out to be in poor condition and had been used probably twice in the last 2 years. A man with 3 children. His wife had died of fever in the summer, and he was trying to get his children to his wife's people in Chihuahua. He had almost nothing. "What did you do?" I said. "We gave him what we had, corn, some dried meat, water for 3 days. She was quiet. Sister Tomasa gave him her rosary, hers specifically, the one she'd carried for 40 years. She said she didn't need it anymore because she knew all the prayers. I stopped working and looked at her. "Did they make it?" I said. "I don't know," she said. She kept mending. "We almost never know. That is the arrangement." I thought about that arrangement for a long time. My father had a different arrangement. My father's arrangement was that everything he did had to be known, recorded, credited. He was a precise and capable man, and he did some good things, and he did not do them without witness. I had thought, when I was younger and angrier, that this made them worthless. Now I was less sure. Now I thought maybe it just made them human. But Sister Tomasa giving a stranger her rosary and never knowing if it mattered, that was something else. That was a different order of thing altogether. The food situation came to a head in the second week. I had been doing what I could. I shot a mule deer on the third morning and dressed it out and smoked what I could of it, but that wasn't enough, not long term, and I could see the math of it clearly enough. 3 women, a property that needed constant work, no supply wagon since November, a diocese far away that had already called it non-viable. Something was going to give, and it was going to give before summer. I thought about what I had, which wasn't much outwardly. Some cash money in my saddlebag, not a lot but some, maybe enough. The name I'd been carrying around for 3 years like an unlucky coin. The nearest town with anything resembling commerce was a place called Abilene Creek, which wasn't on the Canadian but was close to it, about 2 days' ride. I knew the name because I'd come through it going south. It had a general store and a land office and a saloon and a small hotel and a telegraph office, which was the part that mattered. I told Sister Claudia I needed to ride out for a few days. She looked at me. I was 2 weeks out from a bullet wound, and my color was still not right, and she knew it. "On an errand," I said. "What errand?" "Supply," I said. "I know a way to get what you need out here." She looked at me for a long time. She had a way of looking at you that didn't have any theater in it, no narrowed eyes, no tilted head. She just looked, straight and quiet, and you had the sense she was reading something that was either there or not, and there wasn't much point in trying to manage what she read. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know. You were brought here, you were helped. That's where the obligation ends. I'm not holding you to anything." "I know you're not," I said. Another long look. Then, all right. The ride to Abilene Creek took me 2.5 days because I moved carefully. Cruzado was sound, but I was still working around the wound, and I knew what pushing too hard could do. I slept outside both nights, clear skies and cold, lying on my back looking at more stars than most people in the settled part of the country would ever see in a lifetime. I thought about my father. My father and I had argued about a lot of things over a lot of years, but the last argument had been about the simplest one, which was, what is a man for? He believed a man was for making something that lasted. An institution, a record, a name on a building. He had built things, and I will not pretend he hadn't, because it would be dishonest, and he didn't deserve dishonesty. He had built a territory near enough. But what I had seen from the inside of that building project was how it was done, who got moved, who got ignored, what was called necessary. I had not been able to stay. What I had been doing for 3 years since was, I realized lying out there under those stars, the opposite question. Not what is a man for, but what is a man worth? A man with no name anyone recognized, no position, no family. What was that worth? The answer had been unclear for 3 years. Cattle work and trail work and 2 stretches of real hardship and 1 serious mistake and 1 bullet. I reached Abilene Creek in the late afternoon of the 3rd day. I went to the telegraph office first. The man at the telegraph office was small and exacting, and he took down my message without expression. It was addressed to a man named Aldous Reeve, who was my father's personal secretary and had been for 20 years. Aldous was not my father's friend. My father didn't believe in having friends in that sense, but he was the closest thing, and he was honest, and I trusted him more than I trusted most people. The message was brief. It said that I was south of the Canadian River, and there was a Catholic mission called San Isidro that was going to fold before summer without supply money and supply lines, and that it did good work, and that someone with means and influence could help it if they chose to, and that I was asking. I signed it with my name. My full name, which I had not put to paper in 3 years. Then I went to the general store and spent most of my cash on what I could carry on cruzado: corn, salt, dried beans, coffee, bacon, flour. More than I could have bought even a year ago, because I'd been careful with money the way men learn to be careful when there's no more coming. I loaded him up as much as was reasonable, and I started back. There was a moment, riding out of Abilene Creek with the supplies loaded and the telegraph message sent, where something changed in me. I don't know how else to say it. It was a quiet shift, not a revelation, not a thematic moment of the kind I'd been warned off putting in this story. It was just that I felt, for the first time in 3 years, that I had done a thing that was worth something. Not because anyone would know about it. Not because it would go on a record. Because a woman who had sat up all night with a wounded stranger she didn't know would be able to eat, and the old woman with the milky eyes could eat, and the young one who was direct and unafraid would be all right a little longer. That was all it was. I was back at San Isidro on the evening of the second day of the return trip. Sister Claudia came out when she heard cruzado, and she stood in the doorway and looked at the loaded horse and then at me. She didn't say anything for a moment. "Coffee?" I said. "I got coffee." She pressed her lips together. It was not disapproval. I could tell the difference by now. She came and took Cruzado's bridle without being asked and started leading him to the corral, and over her shoulder she said, "Come in when you're cleaned up. There's soup." I stood there a moment in the evening light and watched her walk the horse, and I thought, there it is. There's the thing I'd been looking for. Not the bullet in the side, not the 3 years of proving something, not any of the large and dramatic portions. Just this, a woman walking my horse to water like it was her own business, soup on, no performance. A person who helped because that was who she was. I cleaned up at the well. I went in. The soup was thin, but it was hot and it was good. Sister Perpetua had put dried herbs in it. I didn't know what kind, and the bread was fresh. She'd made it while I was gone, and Sister Tomasa ate her bowl slowly and smiled at nothing the way very old people sometimes do. We didn't talk much. The room had lamplight and the sound of the wind outside and the small sounds of eating, and that was enough. Afterward, Sister Claudia asked me, in the direct way she asked everything, how I had paid for the supplies. I told her. She was quiet. "And the telegraph," she said, "to whom?" I told her that too. Not everything, not the whole history of it, but enough. That my father was someone who could help if he chose to, that I'd asked him, that I didn't know if he would. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me the first night, reading whatever was there. 3 years, she said. "You've been away from it 3 years." "Yes." "And you used it now." "Yes." She was quiet again. The lamp guttered slightly in some draft from the window. She reached over and steadied it without looking at it. "Why?" she said. I thought about it, honestly thought about it, sitting there at that wooden table in that nearly empty room. "Because it was worth using for," I said. "First time I found something it was worth using for." She looked at me for a long time after that, straight and quiet, the way she did. And then she said something I have carried around for the 40 years since, the way Sister Tomasa carried her rosary, which is to say, I don't need to take it out anymore because I know it by heart. She said, "You are not what you thought you were." Not a compliment exactly, not reassurance, something more accurate than either. She said it the way she said everything, without theater, without decoration, as a plain, true thing. You are not what you thought you were. Meaning, whatever diminished thing you'd been carrying around as your own accounting of yourself, that's not the number. The number is different. I didn't answer. There wasn't an answer to give. I just sat with it. The reply from Aldous came 11 days later, by way of a rider from Abilene Creek who had been asked to find San Isidro Mission and deliver it. The rider was a young man who'd clearly been well paid to make the trip and was also clearly uncomfortable with the terrain and happy to be leaving. He gave me the envelope and left. The envelope had my full name on it in Aldis's precise handwriting. Inside was a letter and a bank draft. The letter was from Aldis. He said that my father had received my message, that my father had read it 3 times. Aldis specified this, 3 times, and I knew that was Aldis telling me something on the side, and that arrangements had been made through the territorial government's discretionary fund for a quarterly supply allocation to San Isidro Mission, subject to the diocese confirming the mission's status, which Aldis had reason to believe would be favorably resolved. He said that my father had asked how I was. He said that he, Aldis, hoped I was well. The bank draft was for an amount that was more than I'd expected. My father had not written himself. I did not expect him to. That wasn't how he worked, but he'd read it 3 times and he'd done the thing. I stood there in the dusty yard of San Isidro with the letter in my hand and a feeling I couldn't quite name. Something between grief and relief that had been waiting for a long time to be felt. Sister Claudia came out and stood nearby. She waited. "It worked," I said. "Supply line quarterly, and the diocese question will be handled." She stood very still. Then she looked away at the plains. She pressed her lips together hard for a moment and then released them, and that was all the sign she gave, but I saw it. "Thank your father," she said. "I will," I said, "eventually." She looked back at me. Something moved in her face that wasn't the usual directness, quieter than that, more particular. "Go find him," she said. "Not for the mission, for yourself. Go find him." That was when she did something she hadn't done in the 3 weeks I'd been there. She put her hand on my arm. Just her hand on my arm through my sleeve, brief and firm, the way a person touches someone they've decided something about. Then she took it away and went back inside, because there was work to do. There was always work to do at San Isidro, and that was her way. I left 2 days later. Early morning, the sky going gray, then pale yellow, then a wash of something almost pink over the flat horizon. Cruzado was sound, and I was sound enough, and I had everything I needed on the horse. Sister Perpetua stood in the yard and raised her hand. Sister Tomasa was not out yet. She rose slowly in the mornings. But I had said goodbye to her the night before, and she had held my hand in both of hers, and said something in Spanish I only partly understood, a blessing of some kind, and I had said thank you in what Spanish I had, and she had seemed satisfied. Sister Claudia stood in the doorway. Not in the yard, in the doorway, which was where she stood when she was seeing something off, neither inside nor outside. She looked at me on the horse, and I looked at her, and I touched my hat brim. She nodded once. That was it. I rode north. I rode north for 2 days, and then I found the road east, the one I knew, and I started thinking about the capital and my father's house, and what that conversation might look like. I was not the same man who had walked out of that house 3 years before. I didn't know yet what the conversation would be. I didn't know if it would go well. My father was still my father, and I was still myself, and the things between us were still there. But they seemed smaller, not unimportant, but smaller, proportioned differently. Because here was the thing that had shifted, in those weeks at San Isidro, in that particular company. I had learned what a person was worth when they had nothing but themselves. And I had learned it from a woman who ran a dying mission on nearly nothing, and sat up all night with strangers, and gave away the last of the food, and knew that you almost never found out how any of it ended, and did it anyway, day after day. In that dried-out country under that enormous sky, with 2 other women and a broken cross and a goat, and a rifle that hadn't been properly oiled in years. I had thought I was worth nothing much. I had thought the name I'd been refusing to use was the only thing I'd ever actually had, and that without it I was just another hand, another rider, another man aging into the dust. She had told me I was not what I thought I was. She had said it plainly, without reason to flatter me, without anything to gain from it. She had been running a cold calculation on who I was from the moment I stepped through that door, and after 3 weeks she had told me the result, and the result was that I was more than my accounting. I've done a lot since then. Made my peace with my father, imperfectly, which is the only way such things are made. Went back to the territory eventually in a different capacity than I'd left it. Built something of my own, nothing my father would have built but something that was mine, and I was able to do it because I had learned a thing about what it meant to work without witness, to do the useful thing and not need anyone to see it, to give away what you have when you find something worth giving it to. San Isidro is still there. I checked last time I was through that part of the country. Still small, still on the edge of things, but standing. There are 5 sisters now. The cross on the roof has been repaired, both arms sound. Sister Claudia has been dead 12 years. Sister Perpetua runs the place. I hear she is very direct, and that she does not say anything she doesn't mean, and that she sits up all night with strangers who need it. Good. That's right. That's how you do it.